Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Switched On. I'm your host, Ben Lamoureux, and I'm joined today by two returning guests. Welcome back to the show, Alex.
That's Alex Plant, and I'm happy to say that the Plant family finally made it into Smash Bros.
Yes, you have representation now.
Yes.
And welcome back, Elijah.
Thanks. I'm happy to say that I didn't come up with something cool to say.
Nailed it.
Totally thought about that all the way home as I was driving home.
Well, you've been represented in my Pokemon file for a long time, but now Smash recognizes your greatness as well.
My family will conquer all the Nintendo franchises. And,
other than Metroid.
Other than Metroid. Because no Metroid games will ever be made ever again.
It's starting to look that way. So we'll definitely get into that a little bit later. This episode's probably going to be a little shorter than usual, just because it hasn't been that long since the last episode, and there hasn't been all that much new news. But, you know, as Alex alluded to, there was a pretty big announcement in the realm of Metroid, so that's going to be our top story for the night a little bit later. But for now, let's just go ahead and jump into the Nintendo news for the last week or so. So our first story is the return of Switched On's unofficial mascot, Bowsette.
When did this happen?
Did we
just allow
did we have an election or?
I think it was more just like an organic proxy of me finding a story about her like every week. So this week the story is that Bowsette's creator was given a trophy from Nico Nico, which is a Japanese streaming service kind of like YouTube or Twitch. A lot of Japanese game developers will use Nico Nico to live stream their events. So they gave Bowsette's creator a trophy because Bowsette was one of the top 20 trending video game topics of 2018.
I'd like to think that's thanks to Gamnesia.
In your show notes, for some reason, I thought it was beyond just video games and just top 20 trends overall.
Well, actually, it might. I don't think it was. I think it was just video games, but
which would just be an excellent, commentary point on 2018.
Yeah,
anyway.
I was amazed. Like when I went to EGLX in October, that was maybe like I don't know, a month or so after the whole Bowsette thing had started, and there was already cosplayers and people selling art. So it was definitely a big trend.
I think there were probably cosplayers like the next day, probably.
Yeah, for real.
The minute someone saw it.
Yeah, I follow a few cosplayers on Twitter, so my feed was pretty full of like Bowsette and Bouette and Thwompette and all of the variations.
Piranha Plant Ed.
Yeah, that's gotta happen next now.
Well, maybe SNK will make a fighting game with all the Ets fighting each other.
That's probably the only way that you'd get me to buy an SNK game. So moving on, we had a handful of Smash stories from the last couple weeks. The first one is just more good news about sales. I think on the last episode we talked a bit about some of the records it was breaking, and it just broke another one. Smash Ultimate is now the fastest selling exclusive ever, based on first month sales in the US. So that's from the NPD group, so they only track sales in the US. 70% higher than Brawl, which was the previous best-selling Smash.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see how this plays out once we get global shipments, at least in a few hours. Because Mario Odyssey set a pretty high bar that's going to be tough for Smash Ultimate to beat. Yeah,
I know Smash is doing pretty well in Japan too. I haven't heard as much about Europe, but we'll see. Because Odyssey, it had the benefit of being like the big holiday title that year. Smash did too, but it had to share the spotlight, a little bit with Pokemon. But it's really performing fantastically, and it's not hard to see why if you've played the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's Smash, and it's the best Smash, arguably ever.
For sure. So I think back before we were switched on, back when there was still a Nintendo Week podcast, I believe we theorized that Decidueye would be the sort of Gen 7 representative in Smash Bros. And it turns out that he almost was. It basically came down to just Decidueye and Incineroar, and then Sakurai ended up siding with Incineroar, partially because he just really liked the idea of a character sort of based around wrestling moves.
Yeah, I can forgive it for that because his little victory pose things are really funny.
I love it.
But I'm still salty that it wasn't Decidueye.
And if he wanted a wrestler, he could have just made The Rock.
This is true.
He isn't everything.
Or John Cena.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't be able to see him. It would just be a whole thing.
I'm not so much salty because of the choice, but it's more because we have plenty of fire-wielding characters in Smash already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But like you said, I love the little, the victory poses he does. It's almost like you get a free taunt like every time you attack without actually having to taunt.
Plus the audio callouts that he does are kind of amusing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think Decidueye would have been cool to play as. I like a lot of projectile-based characters, but so far Incineroar has been my favorite new fighter. And like I said, he's a little different than what I normally play as. He's an up-close physical guy. He doesn't really have any projectiles. He's all about, getting in there and landing some powerful moves. So it's cool for me to be able to switch up to a sort of slower, heavier character when I normally play faster projectile-based characters.
Yeah. I'd still like to see Decidueye in Wave 2 DLC or something like that.
Yeah, here's hoping.
I mean, we're getting Joker, so anything's possible.
That's
yeah,
true.
for sure. So actually, some very recent Smash news. Version 2.0 just dropped. I was actually, originally in our outline for this episode, I was going to talk about rumors about 2.0 coming out and then Nintendo confirming the rumors. But before we had a chance to talk about any of that, the update just went ahead and dropped. So that's out right now. You can play as Piranha Plant, and there was there's lots of balance changes, which something that I really thought was cool is Nintendo actually put out a detailed patch note for like all of the balance changes, and in the past they haven't done that, and it's sort of been left up for fans to do the math themselves and just like throw the game into practice mode or whatever and like calculate exactly how much damage every attack's doing. And it's just a whole process. But this time Nintendo actually came right ahead and was like, hey, here's what we changed, just so you know.
What else do you need to know other than they made improvements to quality of life or whatever?
Stability, man.
Stability.
Smash stability.
Yeah, this game is super stable now.
Other than,
Well, except for
the new bugs they added.
Yeah, so that's actually the next thing we have on the list here is that I think at this point like 3 game crashing glitches have been discovered that'll like destroy your save data. So that's a bit of a problem. So hopefully that's patched before this episode's even edited and uploaded and everything. Hopefully by the time you're hearing it, it's already fixed. But just in case it's not, as a public service announcement, you might want to avoid doing is it the All-Star mode as
yeah,
Piranha
it was
Plant?
All-Star mode. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's, if you play as the Mii Sword Fighter or as Duck Hunt, they've been having problems in the, was it the Century Smash mode, I believe?
Oh, okay.
So
These are
yeah,
modes I have not touched yet, so this makes me happy.
let me double check real quick just to make sure I have that right, because if it hasn't been patched yet, then yeah, this is a big problem. Yeah, so Century Smash for the Mii Sword Fighter and Duck Hunt, and All-Star mode for Piranha Plant. People have been reporting that their save data has been corrupted, which is, for some people wiped out like just tons and tons of hours of gameplay. So hopefully this is something that Nintendo can fix, and in a way where those people will get their save data back.
Yeah.
It seems surprising that they would release a DLC character with something so massive like that. It's like...
Yeah, they must have just kind of missed it in testing. And that's the thing, like, no matter... you can give companies crap about their bug testing and everything, but it's like you can have 100 quality assurance people like going through and testing everything, and that's not going to come close to the power of like when you release it and suddenly 10 million people are poking and prodding around,
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many variables in this game, too. It's just probably be impossible to test every single edge case.
Yeah.
I will say, though, Piranha Plant is really fun to use from the one match I've played with her so far.
Yeah, I've just played a little bit, and I think it's going to take me a while to kind of get into a rhythm and, like figure out kind of how to like chain attacks and that sort of thing. Getting used to the hitboxes of a character and what their reach is, but... I think it's going to be really interesting, especially the up B move, where I've seen clips of people like just like carrying someone off the stage for an easy kill with it.
Yeah,
yeah. I'm looking forward to giving the Bitey Boy a chance. I just haven't had a chance this week yet.
I've been a Blood Trader and I've been playing Kingdom Hearts 3 instead of Smash. So
yeah, I played a couple matches as Piranha Plant, but mostly today I've been working or just scaring myself silly playing Resident Evil 2. So I might give the Piranha Plant a little bit more of a use tonight, see if I can get any good with them. But for now, I think definitely potential to be a pretty fun character.
I was expecting it to be more of like a troll character, but then I didn't really feel that way. But then I saw people do videos of Piranha Plant, and now I'm more excited to check out those crazy, insane, sort of cheap strats.
Yeah, there's definitely some troll moves available. All right, so moving on from Smash news, that's really all we have for categories of news. Everything else is just kind of miscellaneous stories we've compiled together. So we'll just kind of go through them one by one here.
Yeah, end of January.
Yeah, this is the kind of the time of year where there's not really a whole lot of breaking news unless Nintendo does a direct, which of course they have not, which is irritated the fan base pretty mightily. But it's not like we were promised a January direct. There was just lots of rumors.
And expectations.
Yeah, for sure.
Broken promises.
How dare you, Nintendo? So first up is that China just got an exclusive version of Twilight Princess HD. So how this pans out is that a little while back, I think it was late 2017, they ported Twilight Princess HD to the NVIDIA Shield, which of course has really similar architecture to Switch. So Nintendo's been kind of slowly trickling out GameCube and Wii games on the Shield in China, because it's a way for them to get their software out there without having to try to sell a new piece of hardware. Like, Xbox doesn't sell well in China, PlayStation doesn't sell well, so Nintendo just kind of saw what their odds were, and they were like, yeah, let's just remake these games for Shield. That's already being sold in China, we don't got to try to, put a new product out there. So recently a patch was released by NVIDIA, actually, not by Nintendo, but it was just basically using some technology that improved, I think, 4,400 textures or something like that. So the game was already being up-res to 1080 from its, standard version, but now it's had a bunch of texture reworks as well.
Yeah, and I think the techniques they're using, they're deep learning algorithms. They kind of scan over the textures and try to figure out what the most likely high-res version would look like, and then they recreate the high-res version that way, which is actually a really smart way of doing a remaster. Less manually intensive, requires a little less manual QC and QA/QC too. So I'm curious to see if Nintendo will keep, or I should say, NVIDIA will keep using this technique on the other Shield games.
But yeah, that's what's interesting about this is that Nintendo wasn't even the ones to do it. I'm sure they had to approve it since it's a Nintendo game and they don't tend to look favorably upon people modifying their games without permission. But yeah, they were able to substantially increase the visuals on the game without really probably having to have all that much manual labor and probably at no cost to Nintendo.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, too, if this is maybe possible because of something in the Shield or if it's purely software that might could be applied to other game systems in the future. Maybe the other games could use this.
It should be pretty hardware agnostic in terms of actually getting the work done and being able to utilize the results, from what I understand. I don't think they're actually using the Shield to run these computations on the fly or anything, which is why it was delivered via a patch. I think it was just the textures dumped via a patch. So, you should be able to do this with any game.
Yeah, and like Alex said, it's like deep learning software, and so if it can be compatible with Shield, then I'm sure with minimal tweaking, it could work with something like Switch, especially since it's already running on that same NVIDIA Tegra technology. Alright, so the next story is in a recent interview with Nintendo President Shintaro Furukawa. He was asked for roughly the 10 millionth time whether he still thinks Nintendo is going to sell 20 million Switches this year. But what was interesting is his response. He gave the kind of typical, yeah, we're still shooting for that, blah, 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 that we've heard a million times from them before. But then, without being prompted, he just told the interviewer, by the way, we have no plans for a Switch price cut or successor at this time.
That also really shouldn't surprise people. Switch is selling really well. You could say it has competition from PlayStation and Xbox and PC, and that'd be true, but it doesn't really have category competition. No one else is trying to make a hybrid that is a mainstream console. You just got NVIDIA, which is their development partner on Switch anyway.
Sure.
So
Sony made the Vita and crossplay. That was super successful.
Yeah, that worked out super well.
And Vita is life, so
that's true. They wouldn't be able to call it that if it wasn't.
But so far it's still selling sort of ahead of the PS4's pace. PS4 only seems like it only really got a price cut because they had a new model coming and because they had downward price pressure from Xbox, which kept getting its price cut. So Switch isn't really in a position where it needs a price cut or a successor.
And the answer wasn't totally non-related to the question. Because Nintendo is confident that they can sell 20 million Switches, there's no reason for them to cut the price.
Yeah, and I think as long as they continue making games for it, it's continued to sell.
Yeah. So I'm still kind of holding out hope that the rumors about a new model are true, if not a new successor. And, I've said in the past that I think a handheld model only, it'd be handheld / tabletop model, but a model that doesn't hook into a dock, you could reasonably put that out for something much closer to the $200 price range, which helps for those families with multiple kids that want to, have every kid in the house have a console instead of having to all share the family Switch. So, I'm not entirely sure if Furukawa is ruling that out as well, but at the moment, definitely no price cut coming.
Or if not even that, then just sell a Switch without a dock. That cuts out like $100 of the price.
Yeah, they've been doing that in Japan, and I think they cut off the yen equivalent of around $50, which is still probably considering what they sell them for like $80 as a standalone product or whatever. But yeah, for whatever reason, that deal has remained Japan exclusive for now.
Yeah, I don't know that I expect them to really do a price reduction until they can put out a new model. That would be debut, I think, probably at the same $300 price point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a pro model or just some kind of update that has better battery life or a better screen or something. But I think they want the Switch to continue to be seen as a premium product and not a product that got cut down to a more accessible price point.
Yeah, because it's strange, but there is kind of psychology behind that, where if a product is priced, reasonably, sometimes it's looked at as inferior quality, which,
Right.
doesn't have to be the case, but psychology's weird like that. People are weird like that.
This is expensive. It must be nice.
Right.
All right, so the next story up is still sort of in the rumor phase here, but reportedly Detective Pikachu, Legendary Pictures has so much confidence in it that they've already started working on a sequel like 3.5 months before the first movie hits theaters.
I wonder how much of that is driven by Legendary and how much of that is driven by the Pokemon Company, because, of course, the Pokemon Company would be really bullish about the idea that they'd make more movies, because the Pokemon Company is always trying to turn their things into sustainable media properties where they have, like, dozens and dozens of sequels. So that's sort of my expectations that's being driven from the Pokemon Company side, but who knows? Like, we haven't really heard much out of Legendary about their expectations for this movie, it seems like. So.
Yeah, all I've really heard is a while back there was, again, a sort of unconfirmed report, but that the film had been shown off to some focus test groups and that it performed really, really well. So it's possible they're kind of basing it off this. I think it's going to do really well. I think it might, make $1 billion in theaters. But, if they're confident enough that they've already started the early process of a sequel, then that's really good news for the Pokemon Company and sort of by extension Nintendo, because if you have millions of people going to the theater to see this, some of them are going to be people that weren't Pokemon players beforehand, or were maybe have only played one game, but this is going to be just a huge increase for brand awareness. So I would not be surprised if this translates into like increased sales for Gen 8, for example, and increased Switch sales at the holiday season.
Yeah, and as long as it's like a halfway decent movie, it'll do great. It's got the Pokemon brand behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it bodes well for the other Nintendo movies that are in the works too, including the Mario movie, if they can manage this one well enough to do it well.
Yeah, definitely. Because, as it stands, anytime someone brings up the Mario movie, all you get is memes from the, the horrible, 92 movie or whatever it was. So...
I mean, it doesn't help that video game movies in general have generally been of that was redundant, of low quality.
Yeah,
so, I don't
sure.
know that people know what a successful one would look like at this point.
Obviously, the Sonic the Hedgehog movie.
Oh, yes.
Man.
Yes, Film of the Year. All the awards.
All right, so moving on, the next story is that Damon Baker joined Microsoft this week. So if you're not familiar with him, he's been with Nintendo for about 12 years, and the last 3 of them, he was essentially in charge of all their third-party relations. So that's, bringing multi-platform games to the Switch, bringing indie games, working with people to, bring exclusive third-party games to Switch, all that kind of stuff. So he announced back in December, I believe, that he was leaving Nintendo, and then more recently we learned that he is taking pretty much the same or a similar position at Microsoft.
Yeah, I'm curious whether that means he's really focusing on indies or if he's really focusing on third-party relationships beyond indies, because the way that he sort of announced this on Twitter, he he had a GIF or something that said something to the effect of like, "I've been an Xbox fan all along," and so that probably means that he likes the kinds of games that are appearing on Xbox and aren't appearing on Nintendo, and maybe wants to be involved in making those games a reality and marketing them to the public.
Yeah, I mean, at least from like their E3 last year, their policy with indies has seemed to be, let's just buy them. Let's buy like 20 of them.
Yeah, so that was kind of my thought on this too. He said in like his job description that he'll be overseeing second and third parties. So that made me think of the fact that Microsoft has bought out like 7 studios recently. So I wondered if he's maybe being brought on to sort of shepherd those new companies into the fold and, help them figure out what their place is in Microsoft and what kind of games they need to be making to fit the Microsoft brand or to flesh out the Xbox library.
Yeah, that's true. And it's got to be satisfying to work in a company that's more Western-oriented. Like, it feels like Nintendo, a lot of their big third-party support comes from outside of America, which makes it kind of hard from a marketing standpoint to be involved in making those decisions.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so our last miscellaneous story before we get on to the big topic of the night is about GameStop. And, well, it's not great news. You might want to go ahead and spend any GameStop credit you have laying around. They announced last year that due to just sort of continued financial troubles over the past 5 years, that they were looking for a buyer. They wanted someone else to come in and kind of help them run the show, get them out of debt, all that sort of thing. And then recently we heard a bunch of reports saying that they were just about done, that they had found 2 willing buyers and they were kind of going back and forth between which one they wanted. But it was anticipated that they would finalize the deal in February. And then that didn't happen. Instead, they announced that they've actually now given up on finding a buyer. And as a result, their stock took a major hit, dropped about 28% in one day.
It turns out the buyers were only offering about $5 in in-store credit.
I was wondering who'd be the first to make that joke here. Yeah, so from what I understand, the buyers were fairly interested, but they couldn't find anyone to finance it who thought it was a worthwhile investment. So I'm not an expert on company mergers, but it sounds like nobody had the willingness and cash to buy them up front, with one check. It was going to be more like a long-term buying them out type thing, and basically investors looked at the situation and were like, no, that's a bad investment. We're not going to loan you money to buy a company that's in debt and has no clear path to getting out of debt.
Yeah, this is feeling a lot like the Toys R Us story all over again, where you've got a specialty retailer that's got a lot of debt, and that's causing them to struggle to meet performance needs of the company. And so I hope this doesn't become a situation where tons of people are just out of their jobs, and that somehow something can be salvaged from what's going on. I mean, at the same time, I know a lot of people have, feelings about GameStop. I no longer have feelings about GameStop and try not to think about it if I can. But I do think about the people that work there, because they get screwed by corporate, and they could get screwed by what's happening in the business climate today. So
yeah, for me, it's like the only thing I personally care about GameStop is that I'll go trade in my old hardware there. When new hardware comes out, get a pretty good deal that way. But I don't anticipate myself selling my Switch anytime soon, so I don't anticipate myself needing to go to GameStop for like years to come. But I have friends that work at GameStop. I have friends that have worked there for years, and it's like, yeah, this is a terrible situation to be in, where your company's been circling the drain for a long time, and then they announce like, hey, someone's going to throw us a life ring, and then the boat just like leaves. So
yeah,
not a great situation.
There's some parts of the business outside of the stores, like ThinkGeek, for example, Game Informer, like those are also things that are tied up in this, even if their businesses are not the ones that are really causing these problems.
Yeah, and it would be interesting. It'd be interesting to see if maybe some of that stuff is able to survive independently. Like if they try to like sell some of that stuff off.
Exactly.
Yeah, they've actually already started that process. So GameStop sold off their Spring mobile business for $735 million. But they've said that, I don't know exactly how far in debt they are, but that $735 million, they said we could put it towards decreasing our debt. So it sounds like they're more than $735 million in the hole, which is not a great place to be in.
And if they're selling assets to decrease their debts, that doesn't speak very well for their cash flow situation.
Yeah, exactly. So currently, they have an interim CEO. They've gone through like 4 CEOs in the last 2 years. One of them unfortunately passed away. One of them quit his job after 3 months. And then they've had a couple of interims. So they haven't had a full-time CEO for quite a while. So they're still trying to find a full-time CEO. And the board of directors is kind of trying to decide right now, what should we do with this $735 million? Should we put it towards our debt? Should we put it towards trying to, revitalize some of our businesses and hopefully create more revenue? They're just, everything's in flux right now that the buyers have pulled out.
Yeah. Yeah. That all sounds very much like the Toys R Us situation.
Yeah. All right, so that wraps it up for just general news, and we're going to move on to our big story of the day, which is Metroid Prime 4. So last we heard of that was in November, I believe, when Reggie Fils-Aimé, Nintendo of America's president, was asked about the progress on it, and he said that development was going really well, and that Nintendo internally knew when they planned to release it, but they just weren't quite ready yet to announce that release date to the public. And that was about 2 months ago. And then, much more recently, just a couple of days ago, Nintendo senior managing executive Shinya Takahashi uploaded a video giving a development update on Metroid Prime 4. And the update is that right now there really is no Metroid Prime 4. Things were not going quite as well as Nintendo had hoped in development, and after a while they just kind of sat down and looked at what they had and decided that the best thing to do was to scrap it and to start over. And so to sort of reboot this game that hasn't even come out yet, they decided the best thing to do is hand it back to Retro Studios, who made the first Metroid Prime 3 games, or the first 3 Metroid Prime games, and have since then moved on to make Donkey Kong and Country Returns, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. So Retro, they haven't released a game in about 5 years, and now we find out that they've been put back on Metroid Prime.
I'm interested in what have they been doing for the last 5 years, though?
So we've heard rumors that they were working on that Star Fox Racing game. It's possible that they've finished that or very nearly finished that, and that's why Nintendo can now pull them off that and put this onto put them onto Metroid. But it's also possible that whatever experiments they were working on, whatever prototypes they had in development, didn't make it, and that they were axed as well. We really don't know. Nintendo's very secretive about it. Retro's very secretive about it. We're not sure.
Or that whatever their prototypes were might find a way into Metroid Prime 4 in some way, just depending on what they are.
Yeah, you play as Star Fox in Metroid Prime.
It's a crossover.
It's actually open world space exploration.
My optimistic outlook is that Star Fox Racing is just about done. They're maybe in the bug fixing phase or something like that, and that Nintendo looked at it and was like, "Okay, you've done a good enough job on this that we can trust you with handling Metroid." Because that's the thing is, Nintendo recognizes that this is a franchise that's really near and dear to a lot of fans' hearts, and that if they screw it up again, it's going to be a big problem for the fan base after Other M and after Federation Force. Because they're very transparent about this whole situation. They put out a video apologizing, told fans what happened, basically, trying to keep us in the know as much as possible, because I think they feel bad for announcing a game that a lot of people were excited for, and then, having to pull the rug out from under it 2 years later. So I'm hoping that them, having this feeling of we have to get this Metroid right means that they have a lot of trust in Retro. Because obviously a lot of the people that made the first 3 Metroid Prime games don't work there anymore. Over the years, a lot of people left to work on other projects, and then the Retro team moved on to Donkey Kong instead. So yeah, I'm hoping that this is actually a show of good faith in Retro, and if Retro has really squandered the last 5 years and didn't make anything, releasable in that 5-year period, then I'm not sure Nintendo would have that level of confidence in them to make this game.
Mm-hmm. Or it could also be kind of almost like a PR move for them, that they've decided that they need to restart on this. We need to pick another studio to partner with. Retro's going to give the best kind of visual for it.
Yeah, it's good optics. It's a good headline.
Yeah, it would just suck if it took us 2 years to basically arrive at that scenario, when that's when everyone probably was expecting when they were starting to talk about the possibility of new Metroid Prime games, back when Federation Force came out. So, it would be a shame if they were really just pitching them the project because of the name. I get the feeling that Retro Studios got the job for the same reason they seem to get all of their jobs, which is that they pitched a prototype and Nintendo liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is actually a report that came out. Yeah, according to Imran Khan, who's one of Game Informer's senior editors, he spoke with some sources, and they've said that is basically what happened, that Nintendo decided... So previously, the report was that Metroid Prime 4 was being developed by Bandai, but by a couple different Bandai studios. So some Bandai people in Japan, some Bandai people in Singapore, and then some different Nintendo studios as well. So apparently it was being worked on in across multiple different studios across multiple different countries, and there was just this sort of disconnect where some studios were making a lot of progress, others weren't. And, it just, development wasn't meshing. So apparently what happened is Nintendo decided if we're going to do this thing and do it right, we need development centralized. We want everyone working on this game under one roof. And then they sort of, we're thinking about the best studio to put in charge of this. And Retro volunteered and made a pitch, and Nintendo was impressed by the pitch. That's what his sources have said, at least. Again, Nintendo is, of course, being pretty hush-hush about the specific details of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's not Nintendo doesn't use that development pattern very often, where they spread out development across multiple studios in multiple countries. So I wonder whether the problem was that Nintendo just didn't really know how to manage that sort of scenario, or if the problem really was that the actual lower level directors and people responsible for setting vision just hadn't really nailed what they needed to do for a new Metroid Prime game. Like,
Yeah,
I can't tell which of those issues it is.
That's like standard practice for a company like Ubisoft to have 4 different companies or 4 different studios in
Well, yeah, because
provinces.
all these big studios are global, so you sort of expect them to work that way.
And a lot of them have larger staffs too than Nintendo when it comes to the big publishers, at least like Ubisoft, EA, Activision. Nintendo, I mean, they're not a small publisher by any means, but compared to some of the other giants, they don't have as many people or as many studios under their umbrella.
I think it would be interesting to know too, like how. This game was in development for at least 2 years, maybe 2.5 to 3 years. It's like, how much development did they actually get done? How much of a game was there?
Especially since Reggie was under the impression that, the development was going really well as of 2 months ago. So it's really an odd situation that's kind of still shrouded in a lot of mystery. And I'm hoping that we do eventually get a little more clarity on it. I know Liam Robertson has been, asking around trying to see if he can find any sources. I don't know if he's had any luck in that regard yet. I think it might be a little too greedy to ask for footage, but it's possible that we'll get some development details on, what it looked like and what went wrong.
We need a playable build.
Yeah. Hey, if it happened for Star Fox 2, it can happen for anything. Yeah, so I'd be interested to see what was going on, what Bandai's vision was, and why it didn't quite click or whatever. And I'm very interested to know what Retro's pitch is. And as long as development doesn't stall again, we'll eventually get to see it. But it's probably going to be 2, 3, 4 year wait for this thing. I've seen a lot of people pessimistically saying it's not going to release on Switch. It'll be the next console, but we'll see.
Yeah, I can't see it later than 2022. At the same time. I'm sorry, I can't see it earlier than 2022. At the same time, I can't see it not making Switch simply because, if they're starting now, that's a lot of extra work they have to do later on in the process to port it over to whatever the next thing is. They certainly don't have the specs for whatever that will be is yet. So they'll be starting development with Switch in mind, and it would just take longer, I would imagine, to actually delay it for the next console.
Yeah, especially since Furukawa said that at this time there's no plans for a successor. So if he's being honest there, then yeah, they wouldn't even have vague preliminary specs to work with right now for whatever the next gen device would be. And Nintendo has floated the idea in the past that the Switch life cycle will be a little longer than past consoles, but of course that's going to depend on when sales dry up. If it's still selling well in year 5, year 6, then sure, they'll give it a year 7, but if sales start to slow down in year 4, then that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, and they might be able to extend that some with a Switch Pro or whatever.
Sure. And again, Iwata said he always envisioned back when it was just codename NX, he said he always envisioned the next Nintendo console as a family of devices connected by a single platform. So there's lots of potential. People have said, maybe they go the like iPhone method of, incrementally more powerful models instead of just like one huge upgrade in 4 or 5 years or whatever.
Well, I mean, that's, again, a pattern that they've set with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X already.
Sure.
So I could totally see Nintendo just keeping the Switch brand going that way.
The Switch U.
Oh, God, please no. The new Nintendo Switch.
XL.
Deluxe.
XL. Super Deluxe. I've seen a lot of people talking about that point you made earlier, Ben, that Retro isn't the same studio that it was 15 years ago because so many of the original Prime team have left.
Mm-hmm.
I think that concern's a little overblown.
I agree.
Yeah,
Because any studio after 15 years is going to be made up of different people than were there 15 years before. I didn't stop the Zelda team from turning out Breath of the Wild. Didn't stop EPD Tokyo from turning out Mario Odyssey. Like that's a non-factor as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so for the Metroid series, it gets hyped up a little more just because after Prime 3, 3 of, the top people on the development team left to go form Armature. So that was just like, that was a lot more, an in-your-face migration of people leaving Retro. But, it's not that big of a deal for people to leave over the time. It happens with every studio. And there are still people working at Retro right now who worked on the original Metroid Prime.
Their senior management.
Exactly.
Is largely made up of people who worked on Prime.
Yeah, so at the time, they started out, at the time of Metroid Prime coming out, they weren't these, well-known, talented people in big roles, but they have continued to work at Retro for over a decade, get promotions, work their way up, and now they're in those roles. So yeah. I don't think there's a reason to sort of hit the panic button and say, oh, there's no way it's going to have the same charm as the originals. Especially since, no offense, but it's not like Armature has done anything great since they left. They've mostly made ports, like handheld ports of shooter games. Like they haven't. Yeah. I'm not trying to knock their talent. They did great things on the first 3 Metroid Prime games, but it's not like the loss of those people that went on to make Armature has to be a death blow. Tropical Freeze got great ratings. Donkey Kong Country Returns got great ratings. There's still plenty of talent at that studio.
That was the other point I had in my back pocket. Like, Retro is probably the most consistent studio within Nintendo. They've never turned out a game that was poorly received. That's not happened. You can't say that for any of Nintendo's other studios. EPD Tokyo, I think maybe, but even then, I think they did the like Donkey Kong Bongo-ish games, which have their followings, but are not like big critical darlings or anything.
Now that we have that jinx on.
There is always a first time, that's true.
And then, of course, they still have Kensuke Tanabe, who's a longtime Nintendo director. He's had a hand in many, many great games over the years. And they still have Michael Kellebaugh, who's been their president since, I want to say, Prime 2? I think he was president.
Was it Prime 2?
It was either 2 or 3, but
it was sometime between 2 or 3 at the latest, I'd say.
Yeah. So, they still have a lot of upper management that was there during the Prime games. So it's not the same studio it was 15 years ago, but no studio is the same studio it was 15 years ago.
And it's still a fantastic studio.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. One thing that kind of disappointed me about hearing about the delay was that I kind of had hope that with Switch, Nintendo was going to do a better job of having their development pipeline be solid and not have to really have major delays for these really big tentpole type titles.
Mm-hmm.
That was a problem that they've had for a really long time. I'd say since N64, maybe GameCube. And it seemed like with Takahashi at the helm of EPD as their manager, they were sort of starting to turn that around. And obviously the Switch launch year was really, really well received, and even people even seem to be turning around on 2018. And it just sucks that this is sort of the first thing that's lighting up the headlines in 2019.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's not a trend, but at the same time, a lot of these insiders who were doing reporting on the game's development, a lot of them didn't expect this to launch in 2019 anyway. So this is like a 2020 problem. I think their 2019 lineup still looks really strong, so I think where we're going to find out if Nintendo's having pipeline problems is if we get to 2020 and there are droughts. 2018 had a drought for the first half of the year, but that's because they decided to gamble everything on the holiday season, and it looks like that gamble paid off. So 2019 is a little more, consistent, new game. There's enough new games that they can put out one like roughly every month. So I think the big test is going to be if they can still hit that level of quality and quantity going into 2020.
And I wonder what that means, especially for like big single player games, because there weren't really many of those this year. Some would say there weren't any that weren't ports or Pokemon, which is debatable whether that's a single player game anyway.
Yeah, I would think they would have to be at least fairly confident in their future lineup to make a move so drastic as to basically cancel a game and start over fresh.
Yeah, and to publicly announce it.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Like, I'm sure they cancel games all the time, but they're not games that they talked about way earlier than they normally would, deliberately to get people excited, you know?
Just like they got us deliberately excited for that Nintendo Direct and then canceled it.
Oh no, we got a Nintendo Direct. Didn't you see Mr. Takahashi come up and tell us that Metroid Prime 4 is delayed?
Please understand.
That was him speaking directly to fans.
Yeah, that's what we were asking for.
Yes.
Delay Metroid by 5 years.
Yes. If Retro Studios really did show Nintendo a prototype that they liked, I wonder what they liked about it. Because I think a lot of people are concerned that a new Metroid Prime game is going to be pretty different than the original Primes in some significant way. Either like it'll be more like other shooters on other platforms and less like a Metroid game or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think those fears are kind of unfounded. Like, first of all, like the kinds of design decisions and visuals that are going to impress people in 2022, even in a Metroid-style game, are going to be very different than the ones that impressed people in 2002. So expecting them to sort of just do everything that you loved about Prime 1, and that's going to be enough to make a good Metroid Prime game, like that's not a realistic thing to expect. So that just makes me even more excited to see what it is about their pitch that was so special that they got the job.
Yeah, and hopefully this also means that they're going to kind of fill in the gaps some by maybe releasing the original 3 Metroid Prime games.
That had to be in the plan anyway, I feel like. I just don't know what that means for the timing of it.
So the rumblings I've heard on that is that it's done. Supposedly, Prime Trilogy for Switch is finished, and Nintendo was originally considering the idea of revealing it in December. I'm assuming at the Game Awards, but I haven't seen anyone specify that exactly. And then, this decision, and I think the idea was then you release Prime Trilogy in 2019, get people hyped in an E3, show off a trailer for Prime 4, and then that comes in 2020. But now that Prime 4 is delayed till ? Nintendo has kind of allegedly shelved Trilogy and is reconsidering, like, okay, when should we release this now? When is the right time to drop this? But again, allegedly, it's done and just ready for Nintendo to work it into the schedule somewhere. So personally, as a fan, I want to be selfish and say release it tomorrow, but I understand Nintendo's thinking about brand awareness and all that. Like, when's the optimal time to stoke those fires again?
I mean, certainly if they don't have a big adventure single-player game for the first half of the year, and I suppose you could count Luigi's Mansion, but I wouldn't. It's not really the same sort of adventure game that they were missing last year.
Yeah.
Certainly if that's the case, then release it in the first half of the year. Other than that, like, I don't know, release it when you're ready. You've got plenty of games coming that I'm interested in, so I'm not super worried about this year.
Sure. Yeah, so all in all, I'd say this whole story is sort of the definition of mixed bag. No one wants to wait another question mark number of years when we've already been waiting years and years for this game. But at the same time, I like that Nintendo was willing to look at a game and be like, you know what, this is not what fans expect, this is not what fans deserve, we're starting over. And I like that they chose Retro to do it, and like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic that the reason they chose Retro is because they didn't waste the last 5 years, and they do actually have something in the pipeline that, just hasn't officially been announced. So I'm hoping this means we're getting Star Fox Racing in the next, year or two, and that Retro will then, put all their assets into Metroid Prime 4 and eventually deliver the game that we all deserve.
Eventually, trademark.
Yeah.
I think no matter how you slice it, even if you don't like the delay, like it has got to be a good thing for the long-term quality of whatever it is they're turning out. Whatever that means, we will probably never know.
It's like the classic Miyamoto quote.
Like that quote's not even true. Like, you could delay a game a million times and it'd still be bad. See Star Fox Zero. But I think in this case it's good. I think the fact that they're being forthcoming is a good sign. I think the fact that Like though this is sort of disappointing to me because I wanted them to have a steadier pipeline. It's good that Mr. Takahashi is the kind of manager who's willing to be this way about, pushing things behind on the schedule and coming out to fans and telling them why. Like that's all very positive. That's not a pattern you usually see from Nintendo.
Yeah, well, and also to that point, I think that says a lot about Nintendo's president, Shintaro Furukawa, as well. We talked on the either last episode or the one before that about how he said that, I'm not a game developer, so I tend to leave the decision-making when it comes to, what a game should be up to the professional game developers. But that said, I make sure they fit in line with Nintendo's vision and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure, a past president would necessarily have been willing to give the okay to Shinya Takahashi to just throw out 2 or 3 years' worth of work. But, he trusts the people that he put in charge, and if one of them tells him, hey, man, like, we can't release this game like this, the fans are going to hate it. It sounds like he's willing to listen.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that they were willing to be so upfront about what they were doing behind the scenes. They could have easily just kind of quietly disappeared Metroid Prime 4 for 2 or 3 years until they had something to show.
Like they did with Pikmin 4?
What's Pikmin 4?
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, I think that about does it. Thank you all for listening in, and thank you guys for joining me.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. And as usual, we're going to keep trying to put out new episodes roughly every 2 weeks, or just whenever Nintendo decides to cancel a game. And then we also have our Gamnesia After Dark podcast. We just put out a new episode of that, so if you want to check that out, that should be up on Gamnesia.com. Until next time, I'm Ben. You can find me on Twitter at Erimgard, ERIMGARD. Lex?
I'm Alex. You can find me on Twitter at Legend of Lex, and you can find my family in Smash Bros.
And Elijah?
Yeah, I'm Elijah. You can find me on Gamnesia. Sometimes.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.